Natural gas. Some say it's the fuel of the future. But at what cost? There's growing concern about how we get the gas deep from within the ground through the process known as hydraulic fracturing. Is it contaminating our water and our air with dangers, chemicals, and radioactivity?
We do not believe our water is safe.
New investigations and demands for more government oversight, but others say there's no need to worry. We'll talk to scientists and experts to determine if we're drilling into danger. Congress is looking for answers too. We'll hear from two congressmen with very different views. Drilling for natural gas, is it safe? This is Energy Now. Hello, I'm Thalia Ashuris. Welcome to Energy Now, a weekly look at America's energy challenges and what we're doing about them. Now, one of the possible solutions is natural gas. It's seen as a way to reduce U.S. dependence on foreign oil. And many environmentalists point out that burning natural gas emits less carbon than coal. The U.S. Department of Energy says there could be enough gas embedded deep within shale rock across this country to supply the nation for 100 years. In his State of the Union speech, President Obama said natural gas should be a part of the country's clean energy future. But the method used to get it out of the earth, called hydraulic fracturing, continues to be a great source of concern. Mainly, is it poisoning our drinking water? A months-long investigation by the New York Times reveals that Americans may be paying to get that gas with their health. The Environmental Protection Agency is studying hydraulic fracturing's potential effects on water. But according to the Times, there is a great lack of oversight. After poring over public records and government reports, the Times unearthed alarming problems and sparked a lot of questions. This is an important issue, vital to our energy future. So we're devoting the entire broadcast to it this week. And in this Energy Now Spotlight, we drill down on fracking. We need the energy, but at what cost?
My concern is the poisoning of our water and the lack of regulation.
People that have lost water, people that lost cattle.
Hydraulic fracturing. Residents at this EPA hearing in Pennsylvania say it can be toxic.
They are poisoning the state we love. Yes, it is worth dying for, but not from a glass of water.
Families blaming natural gas drilling for illnesses. An Oscar-nominated documentary, Gasland.
Whoa.
And now the investigation by the New York Times, all raising the question, is our drive for a domestic energy source putting the public at risk?
It's our water, it's our right!
Yes, said hundreds of protesters last fall near Pittsburgh, adding to the mounting concern about hydraulic fracturing. It's a process where a drill goes down thousands of feet and turns horizontally. Cement seals the well. A perforating gun creates explosions that pierce into the shale rock where the gas is trapped. Then millions of gallons of water mixed with sand and chemicals is pumped down to widen the fractures, and gas is released. But something else rises to the surface with the gas. It's called flowback water, and what's in it is raising concerns over the safety of drinking water.
Right now, regulators are not keeping pace.
In his investigation, New York Times reporter Ian Urbina uncovered a cache of government documents showing the dangers from hydraulic fracturing to the environment and people's health are greater than previously thought.
What was the most surprising thing you found out?
There were two. One was some of the levels of radioactivity that were showing up in the wastewater. They were much higher than I expected. And number two was the lack of monitoring, especially as you looked at the drinking water intake systems.
Also among Urbina's findings, for decades, EPA studies have been repeatedly narrowed in scope and important findings have been removed. Nor has wastewater recycling eliminated environmental and health risks.
We dilute it the best we can, we remove what we can, and but for the most part, those products are still present.
There's growing concern in Congress, too. Representatives Ed Markey and Rush Holt have now sent letters to the EPA and the Interior Department. They're asking the EPA whether a congressionally mandated study intentionally excluded investigating radioactivity in fracking wastewater. And they are asking the Interior Department, among other things, if the threat of radioactive materials has been evaluated.
I found every single drilling area that I went to
was contaminated, the water was contaminated.
Oh, man.
Gasland director Josh Fox and activist Mark Ruffalo have been calling for a moratorium on all fracking until stricter regulations are in place.
There's no other industry in all of America that could put chemicals in the ground and not disclose what those chemicals are.
Several companies have made voluntary disclosures of some of those fracturing chemicals after getting pressure from Congress and the EPA. But not everyone agrees there's a direct link between fracking and contaminated water.
It's very difficult, honestly, to do the kind of toxicological studies necessary to pinpoint, oh, this symptom is from that chemical, and make that direct link.
And the industry stands by its practice.
I think you have to look at a lot of them that have been investigated by the state regulators in those states where they have occurred, and those state regulators have said that the complaint that the people are raising is not related to the development of the natural gas operations in and around their water source.
This is an industry, as you said yourself, that is expanding. If there's more monitoring, more regulating, how does that throw maybe a fly in, or does it throw a fly in the ointment when it comes to the country dealing with its energy problems?
I think that the only way we can embrace as a country natural gas is safely. And if there's not sufficient regulation of it, then eventually that's going to catch up with the boom, and we're going to take a step backwards.
Water is our most basic need, so of course people get scared when that water turns toxic. But is fracking really a cause of contamination? Later in the broadcast, we'll hear from two congressmen very involved with this issue with very different perspectives. But joining me first for the mix to talk about fracking and potential contamination of our water is Dave Yoxheimer. He's a hydrologist with the Penn State Marcellus Center. He investigates water treatment and quality issues. John Quigley is the former Pennsylvania Secretary of Conservation and Natural Resources. He issued leases to gas companies. Travis Windle is the spokesperson for the Marcellus Shale Coalition. And joining us from Berkeley, California, Peter Glick, the president and co-founder of the Pacific Institute, which looks at the connections between water and human health. Now, before we begin, a note about Energy Now. Our initial support comes from the American Clean Skies Foundation, which is funded in part by Chesapeake Energy, a major player in the shale gas business. We are editorially independent. Neither the foundation nor its backers control what we say and do on this program. We strive to report on energy and the environment accurately and fairly, with no agenda other than informing the public, you, about critical issues that affect us all. So, gentlemen, all, thank you very much for joining us, and let's get right into the discussion. And I'm going to begin with you, John, quickly, because under your watch, Pennsylvania really expanded the shale gas business. Did the state drop the ball on issues of health safety?
No, I don't think we did. I think in the last 2 years, especially under Governor Rendell, the state put in place probably the most aggressive regulatory framework of any state in the country around Marcellus drilling. The problem is the scale and the pace at which the industry has moved into Pennsylvania. Frankly, in my view, the state has been playing catch-up.
But it appears that there are contaminants, including radioactivity, that's getting potentially into drinking water. Let me ask you then about the science. Is it?
There are relatively high levels of radionuclides. However, this wastewater is treated. And so where maybe the question mark is how much is actually discharged to the rivers.
But isn't the question, are facilities able to treat this water? It goes into water treatment, sewage treatment plants, but those treatment plants aren't necessarily able to deal with the radioactivity.
So there is some question as to whether the municipal treatment plants can adequately remove the radionuclides. So I think this is something we need to take a close look at.
Well, let me bring Dr. Glick in this. And Dr. Glick, do you agree with the science aspects of this, the health aspects of what these gentlemen are saying?
Well, I think the problem is a lot of different balls have been dropped here. We're racing ahead with fracking because we want to expand our natural gas production. Burning natural gas is better than burning coal overall, or better than importing oil from the Middle East. But as we've raced ahead, our regulations, our oversight, our monitoring, our enforcement of existing laws have not kept up.
Essentially, what's really going on here is saying there are lax regulations.
Right,
and
yeah.
where is the monitoring? Listen, let me just throw some numbers at you. Some 50 million gallons of wastewater is unaccounted for. Some of the wastewater that's coming up is 1,000 times the level of radioactivity that should be in drinking water under federal rules.
What's not reflected in many of these New York Times stories that have surfaced over the past week is that the Marcellus shale producers in Pennsylvania are leading the industry nationwide as it relates to recycling and reuse of that water. So the more we're recycling, the more we're reusing, the less we're discharging overall. And that's a good thing. That's an environmental winner. It's good for business, and it helps reduce our environmental footprint, which is our ultimate goal.
Let me ask you, John, quickly about recycling, because the numbers I understand, 65% now recycling, but at the time of these investigations, not even half of the water was being recycled. So, Travis,
We've moved quickly. Absolutely, it's breakneck speed.
Well, I think here's the real bottom line, at least in my opinion, when it comes to public health and this water question. We've got to test. The industry must be held to the highest possible standard. The industry should be expected to recycle 100% of their water across the board, every company, every well. We're not there yet. And that's where the state and where all states need to go. And this water needs to be tested both at the discharge point of the treatment facilities and the intake points of water consumption, water processing facilities.
We're going to get back at this more with our guests when we come back. And later, two congressmen with very different views on what the government should and shouldn't regulate when it comes to fracking. Can the industry clean itself up? Who is in charge of what's coming out of the ground? We'll be back. Welcome back to Energy Now. We're digging deep into fracking and its potential link to contaminating our drinking water. We are back with Dave Yoxheimer. He's a hydrogeologist at the Penn State Marcellus Center. John Quigley, the former Pennsylvania Secretary of Conservation and Natural Resources. Travis Windle, a spokesman for the Marcellus Shale Coalition. And from Berkeley, California, joining us, Peter Glick, the president and the co-founder of the Pacific Institute. What I'd like to do, gentlemen, is get into what are next steps. This country is still recovering from the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. In many people's minds, there are some parallels. So, John Quigley, let me begin with you. Should there be some kind of moratorium on at least new fracking be put in place?
Well, I'm not necessarily convinced that we need a moratorium, but here's what I think we need. I think the industry immediately must commit to 100% recycling of its wastewater by a date certain, and I'm not talking years, I'm not talking months, I'm talking weeks. Commit to 100% recycling by a date certain. At the same time, we need to immediately institute testing of water supplies for radioactivity in particular, and a commitment to full public disclosure of those results.
We do have many companies in Pennsylvania that are reusing nearly 100% of their flowback water. And so we need the rest of the companies to follow the leaders in the industry and also recycle their wastewater as much as possible.
We've increased the overall amount of reuse and recycle rate tenfold over the past year, and that's going to continue to move forward, and we're getting close to 100% rate.
It's at 65%.
Yeah.
I mean, 65% is not 100%.
Sure.
35% of the water remaining somewhere is potentially contaminated. So let me, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that rate is arguably higher over the past 6 months. You take the 65 over the past year and a half. Well, you look at the past 6 months, and that rate keeps getting higher and higher, and we're committed to being at 100%.
Dr. Glick?
We ought to slow down to the point where the environment is not the victim of of this fracking process. We want the natural gas, but we also want a healthy environment, and we want to protect public health.
But will the industry slow down? I mean, this is a lot of money for the industry. 44,000 jobs were actually created in Pennsylvania.
88,000.
Doubled already since
since 2005.
Frankly,
It's been 88,000.
I think some of the industry claims are a little bit inflated.
Those are from Penn State experts.
But what I will say is that too often the industry's response to any of these questions that have been raised has been trust us. We know what we're doing. We can't. This is a basic function of government to protect public health and I think the environment, which go hand in hand.
But a major part of the investigation by the New York Times came up with who can we trust really in this situation. Lax monitoring, lax regulations, the industry being able to monitor and police itself and its own reporting. Who's at fault here?
The industry has to do a better job, no doubt about it. But our state regulatory agencies and the federal regulatory agencies also have a critically important job to do. This isn't the time to be weakening the EPA or weakening our state environmental agencies, and yet that's the risk. We need clear oversight of environmental and health protections.
How can there be agreement between the environmentalists and the industry?
Overwhelmingly, fracturing fluids used in the Marcellus are more than 99.5% water and sand.
And what's in that 0.5% number that you were talking about?
These are common additives. We're talking about an emulsifier to propants, bacteria, killer things that attack bacteria in the wellbore. So these are common things
Something
you can find.
we drink?
No, we're not suggesting.
Would you drink them?
I
mean,
never.
that'll take
and no one suggested that.
Right.
No one's ever suggested that.
These are things you can typically find in your garage or under your sink. Would you drink Drano? Absolutely not. But people use it, and it goes down their drain, and it goes out ultimately into a river.
Dr. Glick, just for a second, is there such a thing as safe fracking in your mind?
I think the problem is there are a lot of unknowns here about what's being put into groundwater, about whether it's into our groundwater or not, or if it's separate from our groundwater, about the wastewater discharge. We don't know enough to say that we're doing it safely, and there are hints that we're not doing it safely.
Let me ask the same question of each of the gentlemen here. Travis, I'll let you start.
In Pennsylvania, we work closely with the Department of Environmental Protection to enhance the current well casing standards, which ensure that hydrocarbons, natural gas, and the fluids used in fracturing, made up of 99.5% water and sand, cannot in any way communicate with freshwater aquifers.
I know that we can keep discussing the investigations and these issues over health, but I do want to get to a final question. And that, Dr. Glick, I'll begin with you, I think, and that is whether natural gas, do you see it as a key or the key to solving the energy problems of this country?
Natural gas, in my opinion, is a transition fuel. Natural gas is much better than coal. It burns more cleanly, it produces far less greenhouse gases. It's better than imported oil, but in the long run, we want to get off of carbon-based fuels.
Is it simply a transition fuel till we get to better?
Well, I think it is a transition fuel. I think we need to transition as quickly as possible, but you have to keep in mind some basic facts. Coal sickens and kills people. 1 out of 6 women of childbearing age in this country has elevated levels of mercury in her blood because of burning coal, and that retards fetal development.
We have a 100-year supply in the United States of clean-burning natural gas, and it's incumbent upon us as a nation, as a region in Pennsylvania, to leverage that fuel in a way that benefits the nation, makes us stronger economically in the global marketplace.
I think we have an opportunity of a lifetime here to really change the way we create energy. We need power. It's just a fact of life.
Gentlemen, all, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
Peter Glick as well in California. Thank you so much. Thank you. And coming up next, 2 lawmakers give their very different views on how to regulate fracking. We talked to Congressman Rush Holt and Congressman Michael Burgess about who's in charge of making sure our water is safe.
For you. Hey, Mom.
You know, girls, I used to cheer back in my day. Ready? Okay! Go team!
That was amazing, amazing, amazing. Mom, that was amazing.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Earlier we said that at the rate we're using energy now, shale gas has the potential to supply U.S. gas needs for the next 100 years. Does that mean it will be the biggest piece of the natural gas pie in the future? Well, let's check the Energy Now reality meter. Shale gas was a tiny part of the entire natural gas picture just 2 decades ago. In fact, it barely existed. Thanks to fracking, it hit 14% in 2009. But let's fast forward to 2035. By then, the Energy Information Administration says shale gas will provide almost half of all the natural gas we use. Natural gas, many say, can and should be the answer to reducing the nation's foreign oil dependence and its carbon pollution. Well, now the New York Times investigation into the environmental risks from fracking has lawmakers asking questions about who's overseeing how we get the gas. New Jersey Congressman Rush Holt is one of the congressmen leading that charge. But Representative Michael Burgess sees the gas industry as a good neighbor. He represents the Dallas-Fort Worth area right in the middle of the Barnett Shale, where companies have been fracking for years. And thanks to both of you gentlemen for joining us. I will start with you, Congressman Burgess, because there's the New York Times expose, there's the Energy Committee's own investigation about diesel fuel going into fracking sites and demands for more study. Is fracking safe?
Well, I think what you have to consider is when I came to Congress in 2003, there were a lot of people who were really concerned that we did not have adequate amounts of natural gas, that it was going to be a problem to create fertilizer, chemicals, and we heard it all the time. Now, fast forward 7 years' time, and we have an abundance. So clearly this is an industry that has undergone rapid change. Now, I will tell you that there are problems, and some of the problems stem simply from the fact that people are not convinced that their welfare is being protected.
In your state, if I could interrupt, natural gas fracking has, in fact, the natural gas has seeped from fracking sites into underground drinking water in Texas among 5 states. What do you tell your constituents?
I think that's maybe a bit of an overstatement of the problem. There are some concerns. Down in Parker County, which is just south of where I represent, there was a case that attracted a lot of attention the early part of December. And actually, this points up some of the tension between the federal regulators and the state regulators.
Is EPA the problem? You are asking for more study of fracking by the EPA, and you're calling it more robust study. And the question is, has the EPA fallen down on the job?
I'd say so far EPA has not caught up with the scale of the problem, and in fact no one has. I think the drilling is getting ahead of itself. This is the point you were making. It's grown by multiples of 100, and yes, it has been used for years. Many energy extractors can say we've done this for years without incident. But never on this scale.
The developers themselves, should they wish to continue this exercise, and this is what I stressed to the President of Conoco when they were before our committee during the Deepwater Horizon hearings, you guys have to be certain that this is done in the best possible way.
But they're tripping over themselves to do this rapidly, and that's the problem.
I would disagree. I would disagree. The technological changes that are occurring within the fracking fluid itself, diesel is found is no longer necessary. There are vegetable oils that can be used.
Well, but as recently as 2009, there were 30 million gallons in more than a dozen states used. And so, yes, okay, if the practice is getting better, that should be become the standard immediately.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but at the same time, that's actually going to be, the developers are going to be much more facile and agile about this than are either state agencies or federal agencies. And come on, the EPA, there is no more nakedly political organization than the EPA right now. They've declared war on my state in Texas. Their word is worth nothing in my state.
Well, I mean, I don't accept either of those.
I will just tell you.
The point is that drinking water should be kept safe. It's one of the things that for nearly a century, America, the United States of America, stood out in all the world as the country where you could turn on the tap and be assured that you had drinkable, in fact, very high standard water. We're getting away from that.
I disagree about that. Every one of those needs to be completely investigated.
That's right.
And whether it's the EPA or the state agencies that do that, or the drillers themselves, it has to be done in a transparent. The public has a right to know.
Finding out what the problem is one thing. Acting immediately when there are concerns about people's health safety is another thing.
I mean, just as we saw in the Gulf drilling, counting on the companies to police themselves, the industry, even the whole industry to police itself, isn't good enough. I mean, a lot of the oil industry was saying, BP, clean up your act here, BP, but they didn't have any real authority to do it. I mean, there is a place for government regulation here. And I'm not saying that either one is right by itself, but we've got to have it, and we've got to have it soon, because this industry is exploding.
Less than 6 months after the BP well was controlled, you have the large companies in the Gulf, Exxon, Conoco, Chevron, who have now instituted the rapid response.
Now. I mean, that's not a very strong argument, Michael. I mean, it's
no. They have changed. They have changed as conditions changed. When the president,
as the public exposure changed,
when the president recommended an increase in deep water drilling,
So.
This problem had never occurred before. None of us knew about problems with cementing and casing. Again, we all became junior petroleum engineers in the space of a very short period of time. But
much of that was known, it just wasn't enforced.
Look how quickly industry has responded. Where is your Department of Interior? Where is the Department of Interior with assuring that this would not happen again?
I've written to the Secretary, because there should be air standards.
We can push those letters down the hole next time.
One last question. One last question. You both say that there is significant concern here. There are problems. Is there a possibility of political compromise on this?
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's the public does not have the satisfaction that their safety is being protected. It is incumbent upon the drillers, if they want to develop the product, they have a role to play.
Drillers and government?
Well, of course, government has a role to play. I would argue. I would argue that the state
better call
agencies.
It failure while we're this close.
The state agencies are much more agile, and the geology is different in my area than his area. So why should the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the Railroad Commission, not be the primary ones who are regulating this activity in my state? Remember, my state used to be its own country.
That's one of the points. As I say, in the United States, there is so much mobility from state to state. There's it has been
mobility,
the standard
but the
that in the United States,
not that mobile.
That in the United States, clean air, clean water, and unpolluted land should be the norm in every state, and there should be standards across the country to see that that is the case.
And we will be watching the debate between you and others in Congress.
The geology is different in Texas, Colorado, and Pennsylvania, vastly different. And the state should have the primary responsibility for seeing those standards are enforced.
And we'll be watching that debate.
All
Gentlemen,
right.
thanks to
Thank
both
you.
of you for joining us. And that's it for this week's Energy Now. And again, a note about the show. Our initial support comes from the American Clean Skies Foundation, which is funded in part by Chesapeake Energy, a major player in the shale gas business. We are editorially independent. Neither the foundation nor its backers control what we say and do on this program. We strive to report on energy and the environment accurately and fairly, with no agenda other than informing the public, you, about critical issues that affect us all. We welcome your feedback on how well we're carrying out this mission. Check out our news standards and editorial policies, which comply with guidelines set out by the Society of Professional Journalists in the About section at energynow.com. And you can write to us at feedback@energynow.com. You can also friend us on Facebook, search Energy Now News. Join our discussion pages or follow us on Twitter at Energy Now News. See you next week.